He's a leader, and he's always been that way.
Helping other people helps him.
He really is a genuine man who's had a hard time.
He was sort of a tough guy, and he still is.
Everybody's unique in their own story, and he made me realise that.
I certainly didn't join up with the intentions of becoming a fighting man. I mean, it's implied, of course it is, but it was really the challenge. It was the thought of, here's something that you just can't walk into. You've got to actually push yourself.
He came across as very, very professional in his military skills, and very serious, but also with a an underlying sense of humour.
I can think of many, many incidences where we had fun, where it was really hard, and the best days were when it was really hard, completely hard. And doing it because your mate's alongside you and not wanting to let yourself down in front of them and knowing full well they're doing exactly the same thing.
He was very respected for his abilities and his demeanour, his professionalism, and his ability to just get things done.
We landed on the 21st of May in what became known as Bomb Alley, San Carlos Water, which is on the west side of East Falkland. The march took, I think, a total of about 5 days, spread out over about a week. We didn't get fed for 2 or 3 of those days. The conditions were the worst I've ever experienced, and most people would agree that. The weights we were carrying were horrendous. The weather conditions were bad. The ground was atrocious. I was tasked with the mission of going forward onto the position to find the enemy's mortar positions and to destroy them. The actual plan was straightforward, but what actually happened was very different. As we got to that region, the lead scout spotted something and halted the whole troop. It was the one night in the entire week where, although we had virtually full moon, there was no light whatsoever. We had complete cloud cover. Couldn't see my hand in front of my face. We only had one night viewing device, a thing called an individual weapon sight. And through this IWS, I could see a group of men perhaps 100 metres away in a huddle. All of the evidence and intelligence that came for the next few minutes pointed in the direction of this being the enemy force we'd been warned about. And this includes our own supporting mortar section telling me they were in position ready to give me support. Events unfolded rapidly. This group started moving. I'd seen a light knowing that they were looking at a map. They were clearly lost or trying to confirm their position. And it wasn't very long before it was obvious that the lead man of this group was going to step on the rear man of our troop, and therefore we didn't have the possibility of ignoring them and letting somebody else deal with this. We had to deal with this ourselves. This became what is essentially called a hasty ambush. At the point where it was deemed that the bulk of the enemy force was in our killing our area arcs, I initiated the ambush by putting up a stag. The troop sergeant and I afterwards reckoned we fired about 680 rounds in that first initial burst. For about a minute there was a feeling of, first of all, massive relief. Pulling the trigger is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Then a growing fear that nothing was coming back and therefore perhaps we were being outflanked by a superior enemy. And then came the moment when I heard a British voice and realised this wasn't the enemy at all. This was in fact our own mortar section who had got lost, that we'd ambushed. We then established the truth and discovered that 3 were dead and 1 was in the process of dying and 3 more were very seriously injured. Suddenly I went to the other end of the universe, and I remember that sense of disbelief. Utter disbelief. You cannot believe the information your ears are giving you, and you just can't find an answer to it. The chain of events was outside of my control. I was now, if you like a leaf in a full spate river being taken off downstream. There wasn't much I could do about the events. I had to go with them. You can't even begin to start, you can't give a bland, yeah, I've just been down south, mate, yeah, we killed some people and lost some people, we come back and that's it, That's what people want to hear. They want to hear the simple black and white answers. There are no black and white answers. Everything is mega complex and multi-layered, and it's impossible to even begin to talk to somebody about unless they've actually got that similar experience. By now, I'd been out 3 times and I was well aware of what it was like and all the things that you end up actually doing, whether it's physically fighting people who are drunk on a Friday night, coping with riots, living with the constant fear of a bomb or a sniping or something of that nature. All of that was, second nature now. I don't remember any after effects. I don't remember any consequential strange behavior as a result of this kind of stuff. It didn't happen at that point. But I think it is where I began to feel personal, where it became personal. Suddenly I found I couldn't cope with crowds. I hated supermarkets. If I stood in a checkout, I was convinced that people were talking about me, people behind me were pointing their fingers. No matter what clothing I wore, I always felt as if I was incorrectly dressed for something. And it was those scenarios that nobody ever wants to see or hear about, where the children are screaming their heads off in terror and it's all gone completely out of control and something snaps. I had her off the deck by the throat and I walked out the house, threw her on the bed and walked out the house, and that was it. That was the end. From that point onwards, everything changed in my personal life. And I got in the car and I drove up to Woodbury Common and I sat in a deserted little RV that I happened to know about, not very often frequented. And I can't really describe in any accurate detail the rest of that night. I felt I was out there on the end of a very slender line, attached to something that wasn't very permanent and something that could be severed very easily. And it reached a point where, outwardly I'm just crying my eyes out in complete despair, but inwardly there's a growing attraction to death, because death is the comfortable place where all this pain will stop. Because I think you're past that point of reason anymore. You just don't know. And that feeling of being lost, of being capsized, where you can't tell the difference between up and down, or hot and cold, or right and wrong, in and out. None of these things that all create the balance that keeps us centered in our lives exist anymore. You are totally afloat in a void, a very cold, indifferent void. All I know is that that's probably the loneliest moment I've ever been in my life. There was a kind of cleansing process. There was a sort of feeling as if some weight had lifted. There was a great sense of relief. There was also a great feeling that I've coped with the pain, that all I've got to do now is just carry on, basically. The marriage is over. That long period of waiting and wondering and hoping and all that stuff, that's finished. Now I've come to accept it. And that acceptance, like everything else in life, is the same. The moment you accept something inevitable is going to happen, it takes a lot of power out of it. So that really was a major step in the right direction. That was a turning round point. I was put in charge of the training for the first half of recruit training. So quite an important job, but I was basically on my own, and I was travelling around the West Country, mainly either Woodbury Common close to Lympstone or down on Dartmoor where the recruits were being trained. And often going out to find them in the middle of the moor somewhere and to sit with a corporal on a lonely tour while recruits learned how to navigate from one place to another, that sort of thing. When I was doing this in the daytime, it was the best job in the world. But when I had to do it at night time, suddenly it became a major problem. And I found I couldn't do it easily. And in fact, I had a weapon. It was a legal weapon. It was a private weapon. I had a firearms certificate. And I got into the habit of carrying this automatically whenever I went on the ground. And I excuse that to myself as being a method of protection, but a protection against what? There was nothing out there that was a threat to me other than what was going on in my head. But when you're navigating on somewhere like Dartmoor at night time, from tor to tor, it's remarkably like the Falklands. And I think that's the point. It was so close to that. It reminded me of too many things. Point at anything and it's relevant, you know. You look at the grass, it's shivering in a certain way, that's the Falklands. The whole of Dartmoor is the Falklands. Was I a risk to anybody? The answer is I don't know. If somebody unexpectedly had come around the corner, would I have shot them? I can't answer that question. I doubt it. So I actually found myself with a lot of time on my hands and nothing to do. And this is what brought, I think, the stuff to the surface, the really heavy stuff. I was sitting in my office one day looking out the window, daydreaming, and this became a habit. I was now getting quite used to spending a whole day or half a day doing virtually nothing. There were so many questions I couldn't resolve, and there wasn't any structure to this. I was standing in the area of the Low Pass, which is the northern end of the Darwin-Goose Green Isthmus. Behind me is Mount Usborne, and just over my right shoulder up there is the area of Port San Carlos. I suddenly found myself actually back there 11 years after the war, and that was an emotional thing because I was going down there to basically lead a group of young soldiers, male and female, on the route we took, the Yomp, during the Falklands War. But for me, it was going to the cemetery and going to the graves of 3 of those that we killed that broke the dam. And I spent an afternoon there lying on the grass just explaining to them what had happened and then breaking down and having a good cry. And I came back from that experience feeling a very different person. That was a significant step for me. I remember now thinking that I was in the wrong job, that this is something that for the first time, probably for a very long time, actually thinking this is wrong to kill. And also feeling as if the emotions that have been pretty much under lock and key in a lead-lined casket for a long time are now starting to break out. I can't contain them any longer.
By the time I got to see him again, really, which was about 94, so 12 years after, certainly the Falklands, and not long before he was actually ended up leaving the Corps, he was a different person at that stage, and it was a combination of the factors, but certainly the blue on blue was a key part of it.
Inside, I felt as if I was underachieving because I was struggling with all this other stuff that was becoming more and more strident. The problems were getting bigger in my head. It was harder to focus on things. I was becoming rebellious, which was a form of reaction, I think. I was trying to find a way out of this place and I couldn't do it. So there were strange things occurring as a result of that. There was a lot of incidents which in isolation were pretty minor and don't seem important, but I think were all very clear signposts along the route I was taking, which looking back now seem quite clear to me.
He's probably essentially the same person, but was clearly not able to manage his affairs, manage himself, manage relationships, manage his role in the way that he had been able to. So it was a reliability, presence, total demeanour had changed and had become sort of less Andy, and probably, you know, I mean, it's the reliability aspect, I suppose, and the certainty of the person you were dealing with before was no longer there.
So I went to see my officer commanding, my OC, and to explain to him that I am getting a bit rebellious and I don't know what to do about this. And his only advice to that was, well, go sick, report sick, and in all probability you'll be referred to the naval psychologists and what was colloquially known as the basket weaving course. And as they say, many a true word spoken in jest. And that, I think, was probably more of a motivator to leave than anything else. That was the only help I asked for. I think there's no doubt about it. Shirley's love for me is probably the single biggest thing that's helped me get to where I am today. You know, I can't explain in words how much I owe her. There was a wrench in leaving the Corps, and I was lucky to go out from the best unit, and I went out on a big high, and it all worked beautifully in a sense. Couldn't have been better. But it was still a bit of a wrench. But at least I was going forward into something I was really looking forward to. So it wasn't if I was sat there thinking, now what? You know, I'd already identified what I was going to do, which basically just sail. We've had a fabulous run today. Cheryl is steered just about the whole way. Over there you can see the lighthouse on the Isla de Calatra, which is where we're headed. The entrance to Moles is just over there. And there she is, where she's most happiest, when we're at sea on the wheel. And Rosie curled up underneath her asleep. Rosie's gone quiet and sullen now we're back at sea again. This really is perfect weather. You could want more.
What made him decide to get a boat or a yacht, I really don't know. I mean, for me, I'd never really been at sea. I think I'd been on a ferry across one of the islands in Greece once. The sailing aspect, I mean, to be really honest, it's not really my thing. I mean, I did it for Andy.
Anything to do with violence and aggression was no longer acceptable. It triggered off all sorts of things. And that's why I was becoming more reclusive. And that's why, in spite of Atlantic gales, you know, and all the fear that can generate, that was preferable to being anywhere in the UK anymore. And all I saw was the negatives.
Once I think we left the UK, he did relax. I think he had something to focus on other than what happened while he was serving and especially in the Falklands.
One of the reasons I bought an old wooden boat was because I felt that you're going to need something to do. You can't sail all the time. And if you're sat in port, there are great temptations to just go down the bar or whatever, you know, and there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff, but you know, this is not what I'm looking for. Again, to be honest, there was no real plan.
I think it did help him a lot, being at sea and away from people. And I think that's why he wanted to leave the UK. He wanted to come out the Royal Marines, he just wanted to go off on his boat and not really think about much. apart from sailing and, you know, living on the boat, living a bit of a recluse life, you know.
Come on. Come here. Right, now then. Head the ball. Back, wait. Ready? Go on.
Gradually, as that voyage progressed and we went through progressively worse weather, so the fears were knocked off and it became easier and easier.
And all this in front of us is the Mediterranean.
As we got further south, it got warmer. That's a big factor as far as I'm concerned. You can't get enough sun. We need it. It's vital in our lives. And the sea was warmer, so the swimming was more enjoyable. I mean, I just love getting in water wherever it is. You come out of the sea feeling alive. And there was little things like that that started to have an effect on my thinking and about relaxing, and I never at any point saw any violence. I never saw anybody with knives. I never saw any road rage. I never saw any graffiti. All those things that we take for granted, that are a subliminal part of our lives which direct the way we think, they weren't there anymore. Why guitar? I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think it just occurred to me that, you know, you've got to do something, and it doesn't want to be too demanding cerebrally. But it was actually an important part because there was no anticipation, there was no analysis. That didn't really begin until, you know, we got down here to the Mediterranean. So I just followed a gut instinct, and it sort of worked, really. The songs that I sing to myself, they have a meaning. And the one that really matters to me, the one that I call Tom's song, that was used as a barometer for quite a long time. I couldn't play that for a long time without breaking down. It was a very emotional thing when I wrote it, and it took a long time before I get to the point where I am now, where I can sing it without any real emotion going on, you know, underneath the surface. So it's not just an entertainment. It's not just something to fill the gaps in. It became an essential part of my life. Writing's always been a kind of a desire, but I never really sat down and thought about it properly until we got to Portugal. And I've got to a point now where things are starting to gel together. It was entirely cathartic, and The Man in the Mist became an exercise in exorcising some of those demons. The story is not about my war in the Falklands or anybody else's that's real. It is pure fiction. It wasn't a case of identifying what's wrong. It was a case of saying something is wrong and I've got to do something about it. I can't wait until this gets out of control. You see, the analytical aspect began after we got down to the Mediterranean, where we finally stopped and just said, okay, now let's get on with it. When I say we, I mean me, really. Shirley had no involvement in this at all. I didn't want her thinking she was married to some lunatic. I certainly didn't want to try to bounce it off her because she's not in any way able to cope with this. And knowing that my first wife had just, you know, it had destroyed our marriage or contributed to it, the last thing I wanted to do was to lose her as well. So I kept it to myself, which is one of the reasons why it took so long. One of the reasons why the dog went on some very, very long walks. If you're not prepared to do anything about the problem, there's very little anybody can do to help you. You have got to make the effort yourself. This is not like you go to the hospital and somebody sews you up or mends a broken bone and you just lie there and accept it. This is a situation where you've got to be involved. It can't be done in isolation. You've got to actually make the effort yourself. where it became suddenly at the front of my mind, and hey, this is the way you should be going. I can find right down to a specific moment in time, and it was a Thursday, the 6th of September 2012, and it was in the officers' mess in Condor Barracks in Arbroath in Scotland, the home of 4-5 Commando, and that was a unit that I was invited to give a presentation to, and I did, on my war and its effects to the unit, about 1,000 blokes. And it was that night, having given the final presentation in the officers' mess at a regimental dinner, that I found myself being lined up by a number of younger officers who wanted to talk about their experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I was there all night. At breakfast the following morning I was still there listening to a chap talking about his problems. And that's when I realised you can do something to help these blokes. So I thought, right, well, what we need to do is we need to get people out of the environment they're in now. The very first guest had never been up a mountain in his life. That had a huge impression on him. His feeling of achievement when he got up there, that godlike feeling, perhaps that's a bit too much, but you are elevated literally, of course, but also spiritually. You feel above the world's problems.
We've helped and supported some people with housing, with benefits, with pensions, and again we can bring in that support here. We run art classes here, we run music classes, we've got a woodwork shop, we've got a bike repair shop, so there's always different things going on.
I didn't have any self-confidence, self-loathing, very depressed. My life was going in a downward spiral.
Needed to move on in my life, 25 years, I've been, suffering with it. I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2003.
Andy put this program together for me where I got up and I washed and I shaved and I made my bed and I done some stretching exercises and I had breakfast every morning. And although that sounds a bit regimented, it was, but to me I needed that, I needed that kick up the backside.
I knew it was going to be difficult, physically and mentally, and it was, but you have to do these things you want to get better. I was sick of being sick, so I wanted to better myself, and doing this experience has helped me. It's given me try to make positive out of it. I was a very self-critical person.
It increased my confidence, it gave me self-belief, it gave me a lot of things towards. Now I've actually moved into a place of my own a month ago, which I didn't think I'd be able to do. I think that's a life-changing experience for me.
You can look at it and say, we're going up that mountain, and they're going, you're kidding. But they make it, and that can build that confidence, and allow them to think, well, if I can do that, I can do this, or I can do that. So it's given them that self-belief back that there is a way. And of course there's also, if you look back at Andy's experiences and how he suffered from it and then eventually overcame the difficulties and how he overcame the struggle that he was going through to then turn that round and focus it on someone else. And he's always very open about his own experiences, so it makes them feel that, well, he's had the tough one, he's cracked it, I can do the same. And it's given them that confidence and that drive to push towards achieving those goals.
It's a removal from the materialistic world down there on the plane. We're now at an aesthetic height. We are now on a distant stratosphere. You get a clarity, both literally and internally, I think. And it's that internal clarity which enables these guys to actually start identifying the issues that are really affecting them. All of that stuff is taking people out of the mental territory they're occupying in a PTSD environment and putting them somewhere else. It's not adventurous training, and it's not mountaineering. We don't need climbing techniques. We don't push any boundaries at all. It's well within the capability of the individual. It's pitched directly at their level. It's just a question of focusing on something different to what you're normally used to focusing on. That's all it is. It's just a simple set of basic guidelines on how to, find a little peaceful oasis in the otherwise constant white noise.
I think this now has given him some purpose to live, really.
He's now back in a position where actually he is, as I say, a functioning member of society, but he's more than that in terms of what he wants to do. He is committed, driven to now use his experience to help other people.
The desire to help other people is driven partly by a kind of purging of the guilt complex. It's a way of assuaging your own problems, and I think because you can talk about it, I can easily. Every time it gets easier and easier. It's also part of the healing process, helping people to understand themselves. And when you see that moment in their eyes, when the truth dawns, when they start to think, actually I can do something about this, I can take charge of this problem, that's a hell of a sense of satisfaction.
There's a hill I must climb to see if you are there, and a path I must walk to ruffle your hair, a road I must follow if only I dare, a forest I must search for a love we will share. There are footsteps to make across timeless sand, and oceans to sail just to hold your tiny hand. A dream that I've nurtured deep in my breast, a hope that is spreading towards the final crest. Cross rolling steps and into endless trees, to feel that first flutter, a stirring in the breeze, to finally find at the end of black night your beautiful face in that first morning light. the vastness of space. Our journey never ends as we search for the place where dreams are real and the circle of life starts to begin another journey with love in our hearts. And the best is yet